"Can I give you a hug, mister?" asked the homeless boy to the millionaire, and Michael Anderson was walking hurriedly along the sidewalk in the financial district of New York City when he felt someone following him. He had just come out of another frustrating meeting, and his mind was preoccupied with the problems of the company he had inherited from his father 3 years earlier. That's when he heard a child's voice behind him. "Mister, can I give you a hug?" The question was so unexpected that Michael stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around and saw a boy of about 8, wearing a faded beige t-shirt and worn-out shorts, stretching his small arms toward him. But it wasn't the child's appearance that left him speechless. It was that voice, that sweet, hesitant tone that made his heart race in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. The businessman stood frozen, staring at the boy's tan face, his big, hopeful eyes. For a moment, the noise of traffic on Fifth Avenue seemed distant. Michael felt his legs tremble slightly and discreetly leaned against the silver car parked beside him. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice hoarser than he intended. "A hug, mister. You look sad," the boy repeated, keeping his arms open. Jennifer, Michael's secretary, who had stepped out of the building right behind him, quickly approached. "Mr. Anderson, I'll call security," she said, already pulling out her phone. "No," Michael replied without taking his eyes off the boy. "That's not necessary." There was something about this child that unsettled him deeply. It wasn't just the physical resemblance, though it was there. It was the way the boy looked at him, as if he had known him for years. It was how he had approached without fear, as if he knew exactly what Michael needed to hear. "What's your name?" Michael asked, crouching down to the boy's level. "Ethan," the child answered, smiling for the first time. "Ethan Miller. I live down the street." He gestured vaguely in a direction where Michael knew there was a homeless encampment under the overpass. The name hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Ethan. The same name he and Sarah had chosen for the son they lost 4 years ago. The same name engraved on the small headstone at the cemetery he visited every Sunday without fail. "Ethan," Michael repeated in a whisper, feeling his eyes burn. "Yeah, mister. I know you always walk around here. I see you every day when I go looking for food in the building's trash. I always think you need a hug." Jennifer watched the scene with growing concern. She had known Michael for 5 years and had never seen him so shaken by something so seemingly simple. Her boss was known for his cold professionalism. Seeing him nearly in tears over a homeless boy was completely out of character. "Mr. Anderson, maybe we should go," she urged gently. But Michael couldn't move. He was mesmerized by the resemblance between Ethan and the memories he carried. Not just the looks, but the way the boy tilted his head when he spoke, how he smiled sideways, how he gestured with his small hands. "Why do you want to give me a hug, Ethan?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The boy seemed to think for a moment before answering. "My mom always said when you see someone with a broken heart, you should offer them a hug. And you have a broken heart, I can see it." Those simple words made Michael stand up abruptly. How could an 8-year-old see something he had tried to hide from everyone for so long? How was it possible that a boy who barely knew him could see through the mask of success he wore every day? "Where's your mum now, Ethan?" The boy's cheerful expression vanished instantly. "She's in the hospital. It's been 3 weeks. The doctors said she needs a very expensive surgery, but we don't have the money." Her voice grew quieter. "I come here every day asking for help, but people just rush past. You're the only one who stops to look at me." Michael felt like he was reliving a nightmare. He remembered the months he spent in hospitals, the conversations with doctors about expensive treatments, the helplessness in the face of a situation that all the money in the world couldn't completely fix. "What kind of surgery?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to hear the answer. "It's for her heart. The doctor said a complicated name I can't repeat, but my mom gets so tired she can't work anymore. That's why I come here." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Michael's heart raced even faster. Heart problems, just like his son Ethan. His boy had also been born with a congenital heart defect. He'd spent the first years of his life in and out of hospitals, until a hospital infection made everything worse when he was just 6. "Jennifer, cancel my appointments for the rest of the day," Michael said suddenly, startling his secretary. "Sir? But you have the investor meeting at 3 and—" "Cancel everything." Michael turned to Ethan. "Can you take me to your mom?" The boy's face lit up in a way that made Michael's chest tighten. It was exactly how his Ethan used to look when he promised something special. "Really? You'll come with me?" "I will. But first, tell me something. Why do you keep asking for hugs if you're worried about getting money for your mom? Wouldn't it be easier to just ask for money directly?" Ethan looked down, seeming embarrassed. "My mom always said it's not right to ask for money. But hugs? Anyone can give a hug. And when people give real hugs, they feel happy too. Then if they're happy, maybe they'll want to help without us even asking." The simple wisdom of that answer left Michael speechless. In his business life, he was used to people who always wanted something directly, who negotiated every gesture, every word. The purity of Ethan's logic moved him deeply. "Okay. But first, you'll get your hug." Michael opened his arms, and Ethan ran into them. The hug was everything the boy had promised and more. Michael felt a peace he hadn't known in years, as if a wounded part of him was being healed by those little arms around his neck. When they pulled apart, Michael realized there were tears in his eyes. Ethan was emotional too, but smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Michael." "How do you know my name?" "I hear people talking when you walk by." "Mr. Michael Anderson, the owner of the big construction company up there." Ethan pointed to the glass building where the office was. On the way to the hospital, Ethan shared more about his life. He and his mom, Hope, had lived in a small shack in the homeless encampment under the overpass for 2 years. Before that, they'd rented a place in the South Bronx, but when Hope started getting sick often, she lost her job as a cleaner and they couldn't pay rent anymore. "My mom used to clean offices at night. She said she liked it because it was quiet and she could think. But then her heart started hurting, and she fainted a few times at work. Her boss got scared and let her go." Michael listened to every word with growing attention. There were too many parallels between Ethan's story and his own experience. The boy spoke of his mom with the same devotion his Ethan had when talking about him and Sarah. There was the same premature worry in the child's eyes, the same maturity forced by circumstances. In the public hospital where Hope was admitted, Michael was confronted with a reality he knew well but had tried to forget. The crowded hallways, the smell of disinfectant, the constant sound of machines and whispered conversations. It all transported him back to the worst days of his life. "She's over there," said Ethan, pointing to one of the beds in the cardiology ward. Hope Miller was a woman of about 35, thin and with pale skin. Even in sleep, she looked exhausted. A heart monitor stood beside the bed, and Michael recognized the irregular patterns displayed on the screen. "Mom," Ethan called softly, touching her hand, "I brought a visitor." Hope opened her eyes slowly and seemed confused to see Michael there. It was clear she hadn't been expecting visitors, certainly not a well-dressed man who clearly wasn't part of her circle. "Ethan, who is this gentleman?" she asked weakly. "This is Mr. Michael, Mom. He gave me the hug I asked for and said he wants to help." Hope tried to sit up, looking embarrassed. "Ethan, I told you not to bother people. I'm sorry, sir. My son sometimes—" "No need to apologize," Michael gently interrupted. "Ethan didn't bother me. In fact, it was the opposite. He helped me today." The woman studied him with suspicion and curiosity. Michael understood her reaction. People like him rarely entered the lives of people like her with genuine intentions. "May I ask about your condition?" Michael said, pulling a chair to sit beside the bed. "It's dilated cardiomyopathy," Hope replied. "The muscle of my heart is weak and enlarged. I need surgery to put in a special pacemaker, but—" She glanced at Ethan and stopped speaking. "But it's expensive," Ethan finished. "The doctor said it costs more than $40,000. Michael's chest tightened. $40,000. A sum that meant nothing to him but was an impossible fortune for this family. He remembered how he and Sarah had spent hundreds of thousands trying to save their Ethan, and how in the end, none of it had mattered. "Hope, may I ask a personal question?" What was your job before you got sick? I was a cleaner. I worked in several office buildings downtown. I started when Ethan was 4, after his father, after I was left alone with him. Michael noticed she had deliberately cut herself off and decided not to press further. There was too much pain in that pause, and he understood all too well what it meant to carry traumas too heavy to put into words. What about you, Ethan? Do you like school? The boy glanced at his mother before answering. I'm not going to school right now. I have to take care of my mom and find food, but I know how to read and write. My mom taught me. Hope closed her eyes, clearly ashamed. I always told him education is the most important thing, but now you're going through a hard time, Michael finished. That's no one's fault. At that moment, a nurse approached the bed. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and a kind expression. Hope, how are you feeling today? She asked, checking the monitor. A little better, Nurse Susan. This is Mr. Michael. Ethan brought him here. The nurse looked at Michael curiously. Nice to meet you. I'm Susan Johnson, head nurse of this ward. She hesitated before continuing. Forgive my curiosity, but you're not related to them, are you? No, I just met Ethan today. I came here to better understand the situation. Susan nodded, but Michael noticed there was something more in her expression, as if she wanted to say something but was hesitating. Nurse Susan takes very good care of my mom, said Ethan. She always explains everything to us, even when the doctors don't have time. Ethan is a special boy, said Susan, smiling sadly. Very mature for his age. He stays here all day, only leaving when he needs to look for food. I've never seen a child so dedicated to his mother. Michael watched the interaction between the three of them and felt something familiar and painful. It was the same dynamic he had lived through with his own son Ethan in the hospitals, the child who grew up too fast, who learned complex medical terms, who comforted the adults around him when it should have been the other way around. Hope, did the doctors give any timeline for the surgery? They said it's urgent. If I don't have the operation in the next few weeks, my heart could stop working completely. Her voice trembled as she said it. Ethan took his mother's hand. Nothing will happen to you, Mom. I won't let it. The determination in the boy's voice was both touching and devastating. Michael saw so much of his own son in those words. The same need to protect, to take on responsibilities he shouldn't have to. Hope, I'd like to speak with the doctors about your case. Would you authorize me to do that? She looked at him in surprise. Why would you do that? Michael hesitated. How could he explain that seeing Ethan had awakened memories he thought he'd buried? How could he say that helping them somehow made him feel like he was honoring his own son's memory? Let's just say Ethan reminded me of someone very important to me, and I'm in a position to help. You don't even know us. Why would you spend money on strangers? The question was fair, and Michael could see the suspicion growing in Hope's eyes. He knew his offer must have seemed too good to be true. Because sometimes life gives us a second chance to do something we couldn't do before. Hope studied his face for a long moment. Michael had the impression she was trying to decipher his motives, looking for signs of some hidden agenda. I don't accept charity, she said finally. It's not charity. It's... Michael paused, searching for the right words. It's an exchange. Ethan gave me something very valuable today, a hug when I needed it most. Let me return the favor. Ethan looked between his mother and Michael, clearly hoping she'd agree. But Hope still seemed reluctant. Mom, please, Ethan whispered. Mr. Michael is a good person. I felt it when I hugged him. The boy's simple faith seemed to carry more weight than any argument Michael could make. Hope sighed and nodded slowly. All right, but I'll pay you back, even if it takes years. You don't have to, but if it makes you feel better, we can talk about it after the surgery. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Michael spent the rest of the afternoon at the hospital, speaking with Hope's doctors and organizing the details of the surgery. The medical team was surprised at how quickly the paperwork was settled once money was no longer an issue. Dr. Robert Wilson, the cardiologist in charge of the case, explained the procedure to Michael in detail. It's a relatively simple but crucial surgery. The pacemaker will regulate her heart rhythm and significantly improve her quality of life. With proper treatment, she can live a normal life. And the risks? Minimal, given her current condition. The biggest risk would be not doing the surgery. That conversation brought back painful memories for Michael. He recalled similar conversations about his Ethan, the constant hope followed by disappointments. But this time was different. This time, he had arrived in time. When he returned to the room, he found Ethan drawing on a piece of paper that Susan had given him. The drawing showed 3 figures: a woman lying in bed, a boy holding her hand, and a man in a suit beside them. "It's us," explained Ethan, showing the drawing to Michael. "You're part of it now." The simplicity of that statement moved Michael more than any elaborate speech could have. In just a few hours, he had become part of these people's lives in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Ethan, I need to ask you something important," said Michael, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "Do you have any other family? Grandparents, uncles, anyone who could take care of you?" The boy shook his head. "Just me and my mum. It's always been that way." Hope, who was awake but pretending to sleep to give them privacy, opened her eyes. "His father's family wants nothing to do with us, and my parents passed away when I was young." "Don't you have friends or neighbors who could help?" "In the encampment, everyone has their own problems," Hope replied. "People help when they can, but no one can take care of a child for weeks." Michael understood the complexity of the situation. Hope would need at least 2 weeks to recover in the hospital, followed by several more weeks of rest at home. Ethan couldn't be left alone during that time. "Hope, I have a proposal for you, but I want you to know you can refuse without any problem." She looked at him with expectation and apprehension. "During your recovery, Ethan could stay at my place. I have a large apartment with a room that would be perfect for him, and I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Jenkins, who's been with my family for nearly 20 years. She'd love to have a child to care for." The silence that followed was tense. Michael could see Hope weighing the offer, torn between practicality and her protective instincts. "Do you have children?" she finally asked. The question hit Michael like a physical blow. "I did," he answered softly. "I had a son." Ethan looked at him curiously. "Where is he now?" Michael hesitated. How could he explain to a child that his son was gone? How could he share that pain without frightening Ethan or making Hope even more uncomfortable? "He isn't with us anymore," he said at last. Ethan seemed to intuitively understand it was a painful subject and didn't press further, but Hope kept looking at Michael with a new expression, as if she finally understood his motivations. "That's why you want to help," she said gently. "Maybe. Or maybe Ethan just appeared at the right time." Michael looked at the boy. "Sometimes life surprises us with unexpected connections." Ethan got up from the chair and walked over to Michael. Without a word, he climbed onto his lap and hugged him again. This time, Michael let himself relax completely in the embrace, feeling a peace he hadn't known in a long time. "I'd like to stay at your house," Ethan said, still hugging him, "but only if my mom agrees." Hope watched them for a long moment. Michael could see tears forming in her eyes. "Ethan has always been a good judge of character," she said finally. "If he trusts you, so do I." The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. Michael spent the weekend preparing his home for Ethan. The room that had once been his son's had remained untouched for 4 years, but he finally felt ready to open it again. Mrs. Jenkins, his 62-year-old housekeeper, who had worked for the family for nearly 2 decades, was emotional when she heard there would be a child in the house once more. "Mr. Michael, it had been so long since this house heard a child's laughter," she said, tidying the room with special care. "It'll do you good too." On Sunday, Michael went to pick up Ethan from the homeless encampment where he lived with his mother. It was his first time visiting a place like that, and the experience was eye-opening. The poor conditions, the lack of basic sanitation, the forced closeness between families who didn't know each other, all of it made him reflect on the differences between his reality and Ethan's. The shack they lived in was small but organized. Hope had done her best to create a welcoming space with the few resources she had. There were Ethan's drawings pinned to the wooden walls and a few books carefully stacked on an improvised shelf. "My mum always says the house might be small, but it has to have love," Ethan explained, showing Michael around his home. During the visit, Michael met some of Ethan's neighbors: Mrs. Wilson, a 70-year-old woman raising 3 grandchildren; old Jim, a middle-aged man who worked as a recyclables collector; Amanda, a single mother of 2 young children. Everyone knew Ethan and showed genuine affection for his family. "This boy is a blessing," Mrs. Wilson said. "Always helping everyone, always with a smile on his face. When Hope started feeling sick, it was Ethan who ran to get help for her." The way the community spoke about Ethan made Michael realize the boy had inherited not just his mother's looks, but also her remarkable character. In an environment where survival was a daily struggle, they still managed to hold on to their humanity and kindness. On the way to Michael's apartment, Ethan was amazed by everything he saw: the luxury car, the tall buildings, the clean, tree-lined streets of the upscale Upper East Side neighborhood where Michael lived. But what struck him most was the quiet. "It's so silent here," Ethan observed. "At the encampment, there's always noise. Kids crying, people talking, music playing. Here it feels like everyone's asleep." The remark made Michael realize how isolated his life had become in recent years. After his separation from Sarah and his son Ethan's departure, he had deliberately chosen a place where he could hide from life, where there were no constant reminders of other people's happiness. Michael's apartment took up 2 floors of a high-end building in the Upper East Side. It was modern, well-decorated, and far too big for one person. Ethan explored each room with respectful curiosity, touching the expensive objects with exaggerated care. "You can relax, Ethan. This is your home now. At least for a few weeks." When they reached Ethan's new room, the boy stopped in the doorway, stunned. The space was bigger than the entire shack he shared with his mother. There was a twin bed with a blue comforter, a wooden desk, a shelf full of books and toys, and even a never-used video game console. "All this is for me?" Ethan asked, hardly believing it. "For now, yes. And if you want, you can take some toys home when your mom gets better." Ethan ran to the bed and flopped onto it, sinking into the soft mattress. He laughed for the first time since Michael had met him, a genuine sound of childlike joy that filled the quiet apartment. Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Dinner's almost ready. Ethan, do you like lasagna?" "I like everything, Mrs. Jenkins. My mom always says we can't be picky about food." During dinner, Ethan shared stories about his life in the encampment, the friends he'd made, and the adventures he'd had exploring the area under the overpass. He spoke naturally about situations that seemed incredible to Michael, like finding food in restaurant trash, protecting himself from the rain when the roof of the shack leaked, or helping Mrs. Wilson carry water when she didn't have the strength. "Were you ever scared?" Michael asked. Ethan thought about the question as he chewed. "Sometimes, yeah. Especially when my mum first got sick. But then, I'd remember that fear doesn't fix anything. My mum always said, 'Ethan, we can be afraid, but we can't let fear have us.'" The wisdom in that simple phrase struck Michael. In his life as an executive, he was used to elaborate, expensive motivational speeches, but none had been as profound as those words from a cleaning woman to her son. When it was time for bed, Ethan hesitated before entering the room. "Mr. Michael, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Your son, who's not here anymore, did he sleep in this room?" Michael's throat tightened. "Yes, he did." "Was he nice?" "He was the most special boy who ever lived," Michael answered, his voice choked. Ethan nodded, seeming to understand the emotion in Michael's voice. "Then I'll take good care of his room, I promise." That night, Michael struggled to sleep. Hearing the sounds of a child in the house again, the soft footsteps in the hallway, the water running in the bathroom, Ethan's quiet whispers to himself, brought back memories he'd spent years trying to suppress. But for the first time, those memories weren't just painful. There was something comforting in knowing that space was being filled with a child's joy again. On Monday morning, Michael and Ethan went to the hospital to be with Hope during her surgery. His mother was nervous but tried not to show it to avoid worrying her son. "It'll be okay, Mom," Ethan said, holding her hand before she was taken to the operating room. "I'll be here when you wake up." "I know, sweetheart. Take good care of Mr. Michael for me." "Actually, I think he's the one who'll be taking care of me," Ethan replied, making Hope smile for the first time in days. The surgery lasted 3 hours. The whole time, Ethan stayed seated in the waiting room, sometimes playing with a coloring book Michael had bought, sometimes staring out the window, always alert for any sign of news about his mother. Michael watched the boy and saw so much of his own Ethan in that anxious wait. He remembered the many times he'd sat in similar waiting rooms, always hoping that this time everything would turn out right. When Dr. Wilson finally appeared, his immediate smile reassured them both. The surgery was a complete success. The pacemaker is working perfectly, and Hope is already waking up in recovery. Ethan jumped from his chair and hugged Michael tightly. "I knew it would work. I knew it." In the weeks that followed, as Hope recovered in the hospital, Michael and Ethan settled into a routine that benefited them both. Michael had hired a private tutor, so Ethan wouldn't fall behind in school, and discovered the boy was extremely bright and eager to learn. "He has a brilliant mind," the tutor, Catherine Brown, remarked after a few weeks. "With the right encouragement, he could go very far." Ethan adjusted quickly to life in Michael's apartment, but never forgot where he came from. Every day he asked to visit his mother in the hospital, always bringing drawings and little notes he'd made for her. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, it was during one of these visits that the first major twist in the story happened. Michael was talking to Dr. Wilson about Hope's discharge when an elegant woman approached them in the hospital hallway. "Michael? Michael Anderson?" He turned and froze. It was Sarah, his ex-wife. He hadn't seen her in over 2 years since the divorce. She looked different, thinner, with shorter hair, wearing more formal clothes than she used to. "Sarah," he said, trying to hide his surprise, "what are you doing here?" "I work here now. I'm a psychologist in the pediatric department." She glanced around, searching for an explanation for his presence. "And you, is everything okay?" Before Michael could answer, Ethan came running down the hallway, returning from the bathroom. When he saw Sarah, he stopped abruptly, looking between her and Michael with curiosity. "Ethan, come here," Michael called. "I want to introduce you to someone." Ethan approached timidly. Sarah looked at him, and Michael saw her expression change completely. First surprise, then recognition, and finally a deep emotion she tried to conceal. "This is Ethan Miller," Michael said. "Ethan, this is Sarah, an old friend of mine." "Hi," Ethan said politely, extending his small hand. Sarah shook it, but Michael noticed her hand was trembling slightly. "Nice to meet you, Ethan. You look a lot like—" She stopped abruptly, looking at Michael with a meaningful expression. "Like who?" Ethan asked innocently. "Like a boy I knew a long time ago," Sarah replied softly. A tense silence fell between the three of them. Ethan, sensing something he didn't understand, glanced between the two adults. "Mr. Michael, can I go see my mom now?" "Of course, go ahead. I'll catch up with you." When Ethan walked away, Sarah turned to Michael with tears in her eyes. "Michael, what's going on? Why are you here with a child?" Michael quickly summarized how he had met Ethan and Hope, explaining the surgery and the temporary care he was arranging. But he didn't mention the resemblance he had noticed from the very beginning. "So you're taking care of him out of kindness?" Sarah asked, clearly trying to understand his motives. "It's complicated," Michael admitted. "He reminds me so much of our Ethan," Sarah finished in a whisper. "Yes." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment as if trying to process everything. "Michael, you can't use this child to fill a void. It's not fair to him or to us." "That's not what I'm doing," Michael replied, but his voice didn't sound convincing, even to himself. "Isn't it? Then explain to me why, for the first time in 4 years, you're smiling." Sarah's observation hit him like a punch. It was true. Over the past few weeks, he had felt more alive than he had in years. But was it really fair to use Ethan this way? "Sarah, Michael, I work with children every day. I can recognize when a child is being used to fulfill an adult's emotional needs. You need to be careful." Before Michael could respond, Ethan came running back. "Mr. Michael, my mom is awake and wants to talk to you." Sarah watched their interaction, how Ethan naturally took Michael's hand, how he smiled at him with absolute trust. There was genuine love there, but also a dependence that worried her professionally. "I have to go," she said to Michael, "but think about what I said." In Hope's room, Michael found the woman sitting up in bed with much more color in her face than she'd had in weeks. The surgery had clearly been a success. "Mr. Michael," she said, smiling, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us." "No need to thank me. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been given a new life. Dr. Wilson said I can be discharged next week." Ethan jumped on the bed next to his mother, excitedly recounting his recent weeks in Michael's apartment. He talked about his lessons with teacher Catherine, the games he'd learned to play, and Mrs. Jenkins's delicious cooking. Hope listened joyfully, but Michael noticed a shadow of concern in her eyes. When Ethan left again to fetch water, she addressed him directly. "Mr. Michael, I see how fond Ethan has grown of you, and I also see how fond you've become of him." "Ethan is a special boy," Michael replied carefully. "Yes, he is, but he's my son, and our life is very different from yours. When I'm discharged, we'll return to our reality. I hope you understand that." Hope's words echoed the concerns Sarah had raised. Michael began questioning his own motives. Was he really helping Ethan, or was he using the boy to heal his own wounds? That evening at home, Ethan noticed Michael was quieter than usual. "Did something bad happen?" the boy asked, climbing onto the couch beside him. "No, Ethan. I'm just thinking about some things. Do you want a hug? Hugs always help when you're thinking too much." Michael smiled despite his inner conflict. Of course. Ethan's hug had its usual calming effect, but this time Michael allowed himself to wonder, was it fair to accept this comfort knowing he'd soon have to send the boy back to a life he knew was much harder? "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you miss your old life? The encampment? Your neighbors?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "I miss some things. My friends, Mrs. Wilson, the noise that helped me sleep. But I like being here too. I like the lessons, Mrs. Jenkins' cooking, my room, and I really like you. What if you could choose, stay here or go back?" Ethan turned to look directly into Michael's eyes. "Can I tell the truth?" "Always." "I'd like to stay here with you, but bring my mum too. And maybe Mrs. Wilson as well, because she's getting old and lonely." He paused. "But I guess that's not possible, is it?" Ethan's honest yet impossible answer made Michael's heart ache. The boy had put into words the very dilemma they all faced. How to reconcile the love that had grown between them with the practical realities of their different lives. The following week, Hope was discharged from the hospital. Michael had arranged everything for her comfortable recovery. He rented a small apartment near the hospital, hired a nurse to care for her during the day, and ensured she had all necessary medications. But when the time came for Ethan to return to his mother, the goodbye was harder than anyone had anticipated. "Will you visit me?" Ethan asked, hugging Michael at the door of the temporary apartment where Hope was settling in. "Of course. Every day, if you'd like. Can I come sleep at your place sometimes?" Michael glanced at Hope, who nodded. "Whenever your mother says yes." But in the days that followed, the visits became less frequent. Michael noticed Hope was deliberately creating distance, likely trying to protect Ethan from an eventual permanent separation. It was during this period of forced distance that the second major twist occurred. Michael was in his office when he received a frantic call from Hope. "Mr. Michael, I need your help. Ethan is missing." Michael's blood ran cold. "What do you mean missing?" "He went out to buy bread this morning and never came back. It's already 4 in the afternoon. I looked everywhere I know, asked everyone. No one has seen him." Michael dropped everything and rushed to Hope's apartment. He found the woman desperate, still weak from surgery, but determined to keep searching. "Hope, let's take this calmly. Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "I thought maybe he went to the encampment, but I went there and no one saw him. Mrs. Wilson is terribly worried." Michael thought quickly. He had known Ethan for months now, understood how the boy's mind worked. "Hope, did anything happen this morning? Did you two argue?" Not exactly argue, but Hope hesitated. Last night he asked if he could go back to school, and I explained we didn't have the money for that right now. He was sad, but said he understood. Anything else? He asked if you were mad at him because your visits had become less frequent. I tried to explain that adults sometimes get busy, but I don't think he understood. Michael felt a pang of guilt. Over the past weeks, he had deliberately reduced his visits, trying to follow Sarah's advice about not getting too attached. But he hadn't considered how Ethan would interpret this distance. "Let's search systematically," Michael said. "You stay here in case he comes back. I'll check a few places." Michael visited every place Ethan had mentioned in recent months: the park where he sometimes played, the bakery where he bought bread, the hospital where Hope had been admitted. At each spot, he showed Ethan's photo and asked if anyone had seen him. It was at the bakery that he got the first clue. Oh yes, the little boy. He came here this morning and asked how to get to Greenwood Cemetery, said he needed to visit a friend. Michael's heart raced. Greenwood Cemetery. That was where his Ethan was buried. The drive to the cemetery was agonizing. Michael couldn't understand how Ethan had found out about his son, let alone where he was buried. He had tried to keep that part of his life separate from his time with the boy. When he arrived at the cemetery, it was already getting dark. He ran down the familiar paths until he reached the Anderson family plot. And there was Ethan, sitting on the ground beside the headstone, whispering quietly. "Ethan!" Michael shouted, running toward him. The boy turned, surprised. "Mr. Michael, how did you know I was here?" Michael knelt beside Ethan, checking if he was okay. "Ethan, your mother is frantic looking for you. Why did you come here?" Ethan pointed to the headstone. "I wanted to meet your son, Ethan Anderson, 2018-2024. He was 6 when he left, right?" Michael stayed silent, trying to process how Ethan had discovered this. "How did you know about him?" "Mrs. Jenkins told me. She said you were very sad when he left, and that's why you didn't like hugs before you met me." Michael sat on the ground beside Ethan, looking at his son's headstone. It was the first time in months he had visited the grave, and doing so with Ethan created a strange feeling of continuity and farewell. "Why did you want to meet him?" Ethan looked at the headstone solemnly. "Because I think he was as important to you as you are to me, and I wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For making you sad. Because if you weren't sad, you wouldn't have needed my hugs. And if you didn't need my hugs, you wouldn't have helped me when my mum was sick." The simple yet profound logic of that explanation left Michael speechless. Ethan had understood, with the pure wisdom of childhood, the connection between his past pain and his present capacity to love. "Ethan, you can't just leave like this without telling anyone. Your mother was so worried." "I know, I'm sorry. But I needed to come here first." "Before what?" Ethan looked at Michael with sad but determined eyes. "Before talking to you about something important." Michael felt a growing apprehension. "What do you want to talk about?" "I know you've been pulling away from us. My mum explained it's because you don't want me to get too attached, because our life is different from yours." The maturity in Ethan's voice was both impressive and heartbreaking. Here was an 8-year-old boy speaking about concepts many adults would struggle to put into words. "Ethan, let me finish first, please." Ethan took a deep breath. "I know you love me, and I love you too. But I also know you can't adopt me, and I can't live with you forever." Michael felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Ethan, But I want to ask you something. Can you still be my friend? It doesn't have to be every day, just sometimes. Because even if I don't live with you, you're still important to me." Ethan's simple question and humble request shattered every defense Michael had built up. He pulled the boy into a tight hug, crying for the first time since his own son's funeral. "Ethan, of course I can be your friend, forever. And can you tell me about your Ethan? What he liked, what he was like?" Michael glanced at the headstone, then at the warm, living boy in his arms. For months, he'd avoided speaking about his son, afraid it would be too painful. But Ethan had created a safe space for this conversation. He loved books, adventure stories especially, and he gave the best hugs in the world. Like me? Pretty close, Michael smiled through his tears. You both have a gift for making people feel loved. They sat there a while longer, Michael sharing stories about his son, while Ethan Miller listened with quiet reverence. It was as if the two boys were being introduced to each other across time and space. When they finally stood to leave, Ethan turned to the headstone one last time. "Thank you for taking care of your dad until I came," he said simply. On the way back, Michael called Hope to let her know he'd found Ethan. The relief in her voice was palpable. "Where was he?" "I'll explain when we get there, but he's okay." During the drive, Ethan was quieter than usual. Michael realized the visit to the cemetery had been emotionally intense for the boy too. "Ethan, are you okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" "How strange it is that two people can love each other even if they're not really family." Ethan's profound observation made Michael reflect on his own definition of family. For months, he'd assumed his love for Ethan was an attempt to replace what he'd lost. But maybe it was something different. Maybe it was simply genuine love, needing no labels or explanations. "Ethan, you know family isn't just who you're born with, right? Sometimes family is who we choose to love." Ethan smiled. "So you're part of my chosen family?" "If you want me to be." "I do. And my mom too." When they arrived at Hope's apartment, she hugged Ethan tightly, both relieved and slightly annoyed. "Ethan Miller, don't you ever do that again. You scared me half to death." "Sorry, Mom. It won't happen again." Hope looked at Michael, searching for answers. He summarized where he'd found Ethan and what they'd talked about, leaving out only the most personal details about his own son. "Hope, I need to tell you something. I pulled away these past few weeks because people close to me said I was using Ethan to fill a void. And maybe they were right at first." Hope listened in silence, holding Ethan close to her. "But today I understood that what I feel for Ethan, for both of you, is real. It's not an attempt to replace anything. It's genuine love." "What does that mean?" Hope asked cautiously. "It means I'd like to keep being part of your lives. Not as a replacement for anything, but as chosen family, like Ethan said." Hope looked at her son, who nodded enthusiastically. "Ethan, are you sure?" "I am, Mom. Mr. Michael is important to us." "Then it's settled," Hope said, smiling for the first time in days. "But on one condition." "What?" "Stop calling me Ma'am. Call me Hope." From that day on, a new dynamic took shape among the three of them. Michael no longer tried to make up for lost time with excessive visits, nor did he distance himself out of fear of growing too attached. He found a healthy balance that worked for everyone. Ethan went back to school, this time at a private institution where Michael had secured him a full scholarship. The boy excelled in all his subjects, especially writing, where his essays showed impressive emotional maturity. Hope, fully recovered from her surgery, got a job at a cleaning company with better working conditions. With steady income and Michael's discreet help, she was able to rent a small but decent apartment in a middle-class neighborhood. Weekends became sacred for the three of them. Sometimes Ethan spent Saturday and Sunday at Michael's place, and other times Michael visited Hope and Ethan at their apartment. They developed their own traditions: pizza on Fridays, park visits on Saturdays, and Sunday lunches at Mrs. Jenkins's house. It was during one of those Sundays that the third major twist in their story happened. They were eating lunch when Mrs. Jenkins answered the intercom. "Mr. Michael, there's a woman here asking for you. She says her name is Sarah." Michael was surprised. Sarah had never come to his apartment after the divorce. Ethan, who had briefly met her at the hospital, immediately perked up. "It's the lady from the hospital," he said, "the one who knew another Ethan." Hope looked at Michael curiously. He had mentioned Sarah a few times, always referring to her as an old friend, but Hope sensed there was much more to it. When Sarah came up, the tension in the room was palpable. She greeted Hope politely and smiled at Ethan, but Michael could tell she was nervous. "Sorry to interrupt your lunch," she said, "but I need to talk to you, Michael. It's important. We can talk right here. Ethan and Hope are part of my life now." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Ethan. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about." Ethan, with a child's intuition, sensed the conversation was serious. "Mom, can I go play in my room?" "Of course, sweetheart." Once Ethan left, Sarah sat down at the table with them. "Michael, I came here because I can't stay quiet about something any longer." "What is it?" "Ethan doesn't just look like our son, he looks exactly like him. And it's not just his appearance." Hope looked between them, confused. "I'm sorry, but I'm lost." Michael turned to her. "Hope, Sarah and I were married. We had a son together, also named Ethan. He passed away 4 years ago." The revelation left Hope stunned. "And you never told me?" "I didn't know how." Sarah continued. "Hope, how long did you work as a cleaner at the hospital?" "I started there about 5 years ago." "Why?" "Do you remember working in the pediatric ward between 2020 and 2024? Hope nodded slowly. "Yes, I worked there for a while. It was my favorite department. The children always made me smile, even on the hardest days." Sarah and Michael exchanged a meaningful glance. "Hope," Sarah said softly, "do you remember a boy named Ethan Anderson? He was always hospitalized, had heart problems." Hope's face completely changed. The memories came flooding back like an avalanche. "Ethan Anderson, of course I remember. He was such a sweet boy, always polite, always trying to cheer up the other patients." "That was our son," Michael said quietly. Hope covered her mouth with her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh my God, so you're—" "The parents of the Ethan that my Ethan met at the hospital," Michael finished. Sarah nodded. "Hope, do you remember talking to a brunette woman pregnant who visited Ethan Anderson often?" Hope thought for a moment. "I do. She always seemed so worried but tried to stay hopeful. We spoke a few times during the night cleanings." "That was me," Sarah said. "I was pregnant with our second child, but I lost the baby a few weeks before Ethan passed away." The connection finally became clear to Hope. "My Ethan was born at the hospital where I worked, around the same time." "Around the same time we lost our Ethan," Michael finished. The silence that followed was deep and heavy with emotion. The coincidences were so many they seemed impossible. 2 boys named Ethan, born at the same hospital, around the same time. A mother who had cared for one Ethan and then given birth to another. A father who had lost a son and found comfort in another boy with the same name. "Hope," Sarah finally said, "there's something I need to tell you. When Ethan Anderson was in his final days, you spoke to me one night. You said you were pregnant, and that if it was a boy, you'd name him Ethan." Hope nodded, tears now flowing freely. "I remember. You were so sad and I wanted to give you hope. I said maybe your Ethan wasn't leaving but transforming into another Ethan." "And you kept your promise," Michael said. "You brought another Ethan into the world." Ethan, who had quietly returned from the living room and was listening at the door, stepped closer to the 3 adults. "So my name wasn't a coincidence?" Hope looked at her son with infinite love. "No, my dear. You were named after a very special boy I knew at the hospital." Ethan turned to Michael and Sarah. "And you're his parents?" "Yes," Michael replied. Ethan grew thoughtful for a moment. "So, when I was born, I kind of replaced your Ethan?" "No," Sarah said firmly. "You didn't replace anyone. You're unique, special, all on your own. But maybe you brought some of our Ethan's light back into the world." Ethan smiled and moved closer to Sarah. "Can I give you a hug? I think you need one." Sarah completely broke down. She hugged Ethan tightly, crying for all she had lost and all she was gaining in that moment. Michael watched the scene and felt a deep peace. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't replacement. It was continuity. It was love transforming and finding new ways to exist. The revelation of the connections between their lives changed the group's dynamic once again. Sarah began joining the weekend gatherings, hesitant at first, but gradually allowing herself to love Ethan Miller for who he was, not what he represented. Ethan was fascinated to learn stories about his namesake. Sarah and Michael shared memories, photos, videos. Ethan Miller learned about Ethan Anderson's likes, favorite games, fears, and joys. He loved building block castles, Sarah shared one afternoon. "I would spend hours creating entire cities." "I love that too," said Ethan excitedly. "Mr. Michael, can you teach me how Ethan Anderson used to do it?" These conversations, which could have been painful, became healing, talking about their son Ethan in a context of love and continuity, rather than just pain and loss, helped Michael and Sarah process their grief in a healthier way. Hope fit into the group perfectly, bringing her own wisdom and perspective. As a single mother who had overcome many hardships, she offered a practical and resilient viewpoint that complemented Michael and Sarah's more intense personalities. It was Hope who suggested they create a ritual to honor Ethan Anderson's memory while celebrating Ethan Miller's life. On the first Ethan's birthday in September, they all visited the cemetery together. Ethan Miller brought drawings he had made, and each adult shared a special memory. "Ethan Anderson," said Ethan Miller, speaking to the headstone, "thank you for taking care of Daddy Michael and Mommy Sarah until I came along. I promise to take good care of them for you." The child's simple words deeply moved the three adults. Michael realized Ethan Miller had naturally begun referring to him and Sarah as parental figures, not to replace Hope, but to expand his family. "Ethan," Hope said gently, "you know I'm your mother, right?" "Of course I know, Mom. You're my real mother. But Daddy Michael and Mommy Sarah are like heart parents. Just like you always say, family is who we choose to love." Ethan's emotional maturity continued to amaze everyone around him. At 9 years old, he had celebrated his birthday in July, he showed an understanding of complex family relationships that many adults would struggle to process. Time passed, and the unconventional family they had formed found its own rhythm. Michael sold his overly large apartment and bought a house with several bedrooms, where everyone could stay comfortably on weekends and holidays. Hope maintained her independence in her own apartment, but accepted Michael's help to enroll in a nursing technician course. "I've always wanted to work caring for people," she said. "Now I have the chance to do it professionally." Sarah, who had remained single since her divorce, found renewed purpose in Ethan Miller and their extended family. Her weekends, once lonely and melancholic, became filled with laughter and activities. Ethan Miller thrived in this environment of multiplied love. His school grades were excellent, but more importantly, he kept his natural kindness and his ability to sense when people needed affection. The fourth major turning point came at the end of the first year of this new family arrangement. It was December, and they were planning to spend Christmas together at Michael's new house when Ethan Miller made an announcement during dinner. "I want to tell you something," he said, sounding nervous. "What is it, sweetheart?" Hope asked. "You know how I always seem to know when you need hugs, and how I always knew Daddy Michael was sad?" The three adults nodded, giving the boy their full attention. "Well, sometimes I have dreams. Dreams about Ethan Anderson." Michael and Sarah exchanged surprised glances. "What kind of dreams?" Sarah asked. "He appears and talks to me. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but the dreams feel so real, and he tells me things about you that I couldn't possibly know." Ethan Miller paused, as if deciding whether to continue. "He told me you two still love each other but are afraid to be together again." The silence that followed was tense. Michael and Sarah avoided looking at each other, while Hope watched the interaction with interest. "Ethan," Michael said carefully, "sometimes our minds create dreams based on things we observe." "I know that," Ethan interrupted, "but he told me other things too. He said you have a box hidden under the bed in the new house with letters you wrote to each other after he died but never sent." Michael turned pale. Sarah covered her mouth with her hands. There was no way Ethan could know that. They didn't even know they had both kept those letters. How do you know that?" Sarah whispered. "Ethan Anderson showed me. In the dreams. He said you need to read the letters together." Hope observed the scene, sensing something profound was happening. "Ethan, are you sure about this?" "I am, Mom, and there's one more thing." Ethan looked straight at Michael. "He said the reason you found me that day wasn't a coincidence. He asked me to find you." "Ethan Anderson asked you?" Michael's voice barely came out. "Yes, he said he taught me how to give special hugs and that he guided me to you because he knew you needed it, and that he needed me to bring you back together." Ethan Miller's revelations were impossible to process rationally, but emotionally, they made perfect sense. All the coincidences, all the connections, all the ways their lives had intertwined, maybe there really was something greater guiding events. "What else did Ethan Anderson say?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "That he's happy, that he's not sad for leaving, because now he has 2 dads and 2 mums taking care of each other, and that he chose me to be his little brother." Ethan Miller got up from the table and hugged Michael first, then Sarah. "He told me to say you can stop being afraid, that loving again doesn't mean forgetting him." That night, after Ethan Miller and Hope had gone to sleep, Michael and Sarah found themselves in the living room, both shaken by the dinner conversation. "Michael, do you really have letters saved?" "I do." "And you?" "Me too." They looked at each other for a long moment, processing the impossibility of Ethan knowing that. Do you want to read them together?" Michael asked. Sarah nodded. The letters they brought were stacks of yellowed paper, written in moments of deep pain in the months after the divorce. Letters asking for forgiveness, explaining feelings, expressing love that had never truly disappeared. "I wrote this on the 1st anniversary of his death," Sarah said, handing a letter to Michael. "And I wrote this the day we signed the divorce papers," Michael said, giving his letter to her. They read in silence, tears streaming down their faces as they rediscovered the love that had been overshadowed by grief. "Sarah," Michael said when he finished reading, "I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to reconcile love with pain." "Me neither," she replied. "I thought if I pulled away from you, the pain would lessen, but it only made everything feel emptier." They hugged for the first time in years, not the polite embrace of ex-spouses, but the deep hug of people who had found each other again. "Ethan Miller was right," Sarah said. "Loving again doesn't mean forgetting Ethan Anderson. It means honoring him by loving more." The next day, they told Ethan Miller and Hope about their decision to try rebuilding their relationship. Ethan beamed, as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. "Ethan Anderson will be happy," he said simply. Hope, who had watched the entire family's journey, smiled. "I think this house will need more rooms soon." Michael and Sarah's process of reconnecting was gradual and careful. They underwent couples therapy, talked at length about their expectations and fears, and included Ethan Miller and Hope in all major decisions. Ethan Miller became, in a way, the family's emotional counselor. His ability to sense when someone was sad or worried, combined with his premature wisdom, made him a natural mediator in conflicts and a source of comfort in difficult times. "You know," Hope said to Michael in a private conversation, "sometimes I think my Ethan isn't a normal child. It's as if he was born with a mission." "What mission?" "To heal broken hearts, bring together people who love each other, be a channel of love in the world." Michael watched Ethan Miller playing in the backyard with a cat they had adopted and had to agree. There was something special about that boy, something beyond premature maturity or emotional intelligence. 6 months later, Michael and Sarah remarried in a small intimate ceremony. Ethan Miller was the ring bearer, and Hope was the special matron of honor. The ceremony took place in the garden of the house that now officially housed the entire family. During the exchange of vows, Michael and Sarah included promises not only to each other, but also to Ethan Anderson, represented by a photo on the ceremony table, Ethan Miller and Hope. "I promise to honor the love we lost by transforming it into the love we've found," Michael said. "I promise our family will always be a place where all kinds of love are celebrated," Sarah said. Ethan Miller, who was holding the rings, whispered during the ceremony, "Ethan Anderson is here too. He's smiling." The fifth and final major turning point came 2 years later, when Ethan Miller was 11. The family had found a happy balance. Michael and Sarah lived together in the big house. Hope kept her apartment but spent most of her time with them, and Ethan Miller moved freely between both homes. It was during a Sunday dinner that Ethan made another one of his important announcements. "I have some news to share with you," he said, looking more serious than usual. "What is it, sweetheart?" Hope asked. "Ethan Anderson came to me in my dreams last night and said he won't appear anymore." Michael and Sarah exchanged surprised glances. Over the past 2 years, Ethan Miller had occasionally mentioned his dreams with Ethan Anderson, and those conversations always brought guidance or advice that turned out to be surprisingly accurate. "Why won't he appear anymore?" Sarah asked. "Because his mission is complete. You're together again. I'm happy and safe. My mom is fulfilled in her career." He said, "Now I can grow up just being myself, without needing to carry messages from him." Ethan Miller paused for a moment, seeming emotional. But he left one last message. "What is it?" Michael asked. "That he loves all of you very much, that he's proud of the family we've built, and that now it's my turn to teach other kids about special hugs." "What do you mean?" Hope asked. Ethan smiled, returning to the typical behavior of an 11-year-old. "Well, I was thinking. Our house is big, and there are lots of kids in situations like the one I was in. Maybe we can help other families too." Ethan's suggestion sparked what would become the most important project of their lives. Michael, Sarah, and Hope decided to create a non-profit organization dedicated to helping vulnerable children and their families. The Ethan Anderson Miller Foundation, a name suggested by Ethan Miller himself, started small, assisting a few families from the old encampment where Ethan had once lived. But gradually it grew, offering not only financial aid, but also emotional, educational, and medical support. Ethan Miller, even as a child, became a kind of ambassador for the foundation. His natural ability to connect with other children in need was remarkable. He seemed to instinctively know when a child needed a hug, a conversation, or simply someone who understood their situation. "It's like he has a radar for pain," Sarah observed during a foundation meeting. "He always approaches the children who need attention the most." "It's his gift," Hope said proudly. "Ethan was born to heal hearts." The foundation flourished over the years. By the time Ethan Miller turned 15, they had already helped more than 200 families. Ethan, now a well-spoken and charismatic teenager, gave talks at schools about empathy and kindness. Often, he would say in his speeches, the difference between a happy life and a sad one is a hug given at the right time. We all have the power to be that hug for someone. During this time, the family continued to grow in unexpected ways. Mrs. Jenkins, now over 70, officially moved into the house, occupying a small cottage they had built for her in the backyard. Mrs. Wilson, Ethan's beloved neighbor from the encampment, also joined them when she fell ill and had no family to care for her. "Our family is like a magnet for people who need love," Michael joked during a particularly lively breakfast, with 8 people gathered around the table. "It's because love attracts love," replied Ethan Miller, now 16 and even wiser. "When you create a place where people feel safe to love, more love appears." The house had become a hub of constant activity. Children from the foundation came for weekend activities. Families they had helped returned for visits and to pay it forward by assisting other families. It was a virtuous cycle of kindness that kept expanding. Hope, who had become a nurse and now worked in pediatrics at the same public hospital where she had met Ethan Anderson, often brought special cases to the foundation's attention. "There's an 8-year-old girl at the hospital," she said during dinner one evening. "She's alone. Her mother is in critical condition. She reminds me so much of how Ethan was when he was little, trying to be strong for everyone." Ethan Miller, now in his first year of high school, but still with his generous heart, immediately took interest. "Can I visit her?" "Of course, sweetheart. I think you're exactly what she needs." These stories repeated themselves often. Ethan Miller had become a bridge between worlds, able to move between his current privileged reality and deeply understand the struggles of children in vulnerable situations. When he turned 18, Ethan gave a moving speech at his birthday celebration, held in the backyard and attended by over 100 people, all touched in some way by his story. 10 years ago, he said, looking at the crowd of friends, family, and foundation beneficiaries, I was a scared boy asking for hugs on the street. Today, I'm surrounded by more love than I ever imagined possible. He paused to look directly at Michael, Sarah, and Hope. I've learned that family isn't defined by blood or legal papers. It's defined by choice, by commitment, by love that chooses to exist every day. Ethan pointed to a framed photo that always held a place of honor at every family celebration, a picture of Ethan Anderson smiling in the hospital a few months before he passed. It all started with a boy who left us too soon but taught us all about the transformative power of love. Ethan Anderson may not be physically here, but his essence lives on in every hug we give, in every family we help, in every moment we choose love over fear. The speech moved everyone present, but especially Michael and Sarah, who saw in Ethan Miller not a replacement for their lost son, but a continuation of his legacy. "Ethan Anderson gave us Ethan Miller," Sarah whispered to Michael. "And Ethan Miller gave us back our ability to love without fear." When Ethan Miller entered university, he would study psychology, specializing in child therapy. The foundation had already become a reference in New York City. He managed to organize his studies to remain active in the organization, particularly working with the most complex cases of traumatized children. "I understand them," he explained in a documentary being made about the foundation. "I know what it's like to feel the world is too big and you're too small. I know what it's like to have to be strong when all you wanted was to be a child, and I know how a sincere hug can change everything." The documentary, when it aired, brought national recognition to the work of the Ethan Anderson Miller Foundation. Donations poured in from across the country, allowing them to expand their activities to other cities. Ethan Miller, at 21, had become a respected public figure, often invited to speak on topics related to vulnerable childhood and unconventional family structures. But he never lost his simple essence or his ability to genuinely connect with every person he met. "The secret," he would say in his talks, "isn't about trying to save everyone. It's about being fully present for each person who crosses our path. Sometimes, all someone needs is to know they're not alone." During his university years, Ethan Miller began researching scientifically what he had always done intuitively. He studied the neuroscience of emotional bonds, child trauma psychology, and dynamics of non-traditional families. "I'm trying to understand how to quantify what we do," he explained to Hope during a late-night conversation. "How to scientifically explain why love heals." "And are you succeeding?" she asked. "I'm learning that some things don't need to be quantified to be real, but understanding the science behind love helps me help others more effectively." Ethan Miller's academic work culminated in a thesis on alternative family structures as factors in childhood resilience. His primary case study was his own family, documenting how their network of support had contributed to his healthy development despite early adversities. "Ethan became his own lab," Michael joked during the thesis defense. "He studied himself to understand how to help others." When Ethan Miller graduated at 24, the Ethan Anderson Miller Foundation was operating in 5 U.S. states and had directly impacted over 1,000 families. But for him, statistics mattered less than individual stories. "Every child we hug is a whole world," he would say. "It doesn't matter how many hugs we've given. What matters is that the next one is as sincere as the first." What had started as a simple request, "Sir, can I give you a hug?" had grown into a movement of love that kept expanding, touching lives in ever-widening circles. The story could have ended in many ways, but life had one more surprise in store for the family. When Ethan Miller was 25 and considering applying for a master's program at Stanford, he had received a full scholarship, something unexpected happened. During one of the foundation's activities, where children of various ages gathered for recreational events, Ethan Miller met Emily, a young 23-year-old educator who had started working as a volunteer. Emily had her own story of overcoming adversity. She had grown up in orphanages and managed to study through scholarships. Her dedication to the foundation's children was absolute, and Ethan was impressed by her ability to connect especially with the more reserved children. "She has the same gift as you," Hope observed after a few months. "She can see right into the children's hearts." Ethan Miller and Emily first developed a professional partnership, then a deep friendship, and finally, a mature and conscious love. When he proposed to her 2 years later, it happened during a foundation event surrounded by the children they both loved. "Emily," he said, kneeling in the middle of 50 children forming a circle around them, "do you want to build a family with me? A family where there will always be room for more love?" The wedding took place in the same house where Michael and Sarah had married for the second time, 15 years earlier. But this time, the celebration was even bigger, with hundreds of people who had been touched by the family's story. During the ceremony, Ethan Miller made sure to include a special tribute to Ethan Anderson. Ethan Anderson, wherever you are, thank you for teaching me that love has no limits. This family that began with you keeps growing, and there will always be a place for you in our hearts. In her vows, Emily spoke about how the family had taught her that home isn't a place, but a feeling. You've shown me that family is made of daily choices of love, of doors always open, of hugs always ready. The couple decided to keep living in the large house, which by then had expanded to comfortably accommodate 3 generations. Mrs. Jenkins, now over 80 but still active, had trained Emily to help with the household management of the large family. This house has a heart of its own, Emily would tell her friends. It embraces those who arrive and never lets anyone leave hungry for love. 2 years after the wedding, Emily became pregnant. When they found out it would be a boy, Ethan Miller and Emily spent weeks discussing names. "It can't be Ethan," said Emily. "We already have 2 Ethans in this family. This boy needs his own identity." "I agree," said Ethan Miller. "But I want the name to have special meaning." It was Hope who suggested the name they ultimately chose, Noah. "It means, 'who is like God,'" she explained. "And it represents protection and care, perfect for a family that protects and cares for so many." Noah was born surrounded by a family of 4 generations. Mrs. Jenkins, then 82, held the baby in her arms and declared, "This boy will carry on the legacy of hugs." Ethan Miller, holding his son for the first time, felt a deep connection with all the Ethans who had come before him. "Noah," he whispered to the baby, "you were born into a family where love multiplies instead of divides." Noah's birth marked the start of a new chapter for the family and the foundation. Ethan Miller, now a father, brought an even deeper perspective to his work with vulnerable children. "I understand now," he told Sarah during a late-night conversation, "how you and Dad Michael felt when you lost Ethan Anderson. And I also understand why you were able to love me so completely. A father's love has no limits." The Ethan Anderson Miller Foundation continued to grow, but always kept its personal essence. Every child received individualized attention, every family was closely supported, and every case was treated as unique. Noah grew up surrounded by dozens of temporary siblings, children who came through the house for activities at the foundation. By the age of 3, he was already showing the same emotional sensitivity that characterized Ethan Miller. "Mommy Emily," he said one day, pointing to a new girl who had arrived at the foundation. "Her heart is hurt. She needs a hug." Emily looked at Ethan Miller, who smiled. "It seems the gift is passing to the next generation." "Or maybe," Ethan said, "it's simply the natural result of growing up in a house full of love." When Noah turned 5, the family organized a special celebration that also marked the 20th anniversary of the Ethan Anderson Miller Foundation. The party brought together over 500 people, former staff, families they had helped, volunteers, officials, and personal friends. During the event, a memorial was unveiled in the garden of the house, a simple but touching sculpture of 2 children embracing. A plaque read, "Ethan Anderson, 2018 to 2024, a seed of love that multiplied." Ethan Miller, now 30 years old and nationally recognized for his social work, gave the main speech at the celebration. 20 years ago, he began, an 8-year-old boy asked a sad man on the street for a hug. Today, that hug has multiplied into thousands of hugs, hundreds of reunited families, and a movement of love that keeps growing. He paused to look at his family scattered throughout the audience. Michael and Sarah, now in their 60s but still active in the foundation. Hope, 55, the foundation's health programs director. Emily, pregnant with their 2nd child, coordinating the event with loving efficiency. Noah, running between chairs, handing out hugs indiscriminately. "This isn't my story," Ethan continued. "It's our story. It's the story of how love refuses to be limited by conventional definitions of family. It's the story of how hugs can change the world, one person at a time." At the end of the celebration, a tradition was born. Each person present was invited to share a sincere hug with at least 3 others before leaving. The garden filled with embraces, children hugging adults, elders hugging youngsters, strangers becoming friends through simple yet profound human connection. Ethan Miller watched the scene and felt a familiar presence. No longer the childhood dreams of Ethan Anderson, but a deep sense that all this love had begun with a brave boy who had left too soon, yet left seeds that would keep sprouting forever. "Thank you, Ethan Anderson," he whispered, gazing at the brightest star in the darkening sky. Mission accomplished. Noah ran to his father and jumped into his arms. "Daddy, why are you looking at the sky?" "I'm thanking someone very special." "Who?" "A boy who taught me that hugs can save the world." Noah considered the answer with the seriousness of little children. "Can I help save the world too?" Ethan Miller hugged his son, feeling the cycle of love renewing once again. "Of course you can, Noah. One hug at a time." End of story. We hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours. Now we'd love to know, what did you think of Ethan Miller's journey and his special family? Do you believe in the transformative power of a sincere hug? Share in the comments which moment moved you most and how the story made you reflect on family and love. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories celebrating the deepest human connections.